Atherton Rail Committee, please come to order. We have a roll call.
Sure. Malcolm Dudley.
Here.
Jack Ringham.
Here.
Greg Conlon. Absent. Paul Jones.
Here.
Scott Lane.
Here.
Narissa Dexter.
Here.
Jim Jantz.
Here.
Alex Kay.
Here.
Tony Nguyen.
Here.
John Maltman.
John is not here.
Okay.
Okay.
And we have Mayor Kerry Wiest. Right?
Yes.
Greg Conlon should be here.
Well,
I talked to him last night
oh,
about
did
it.
you? I hope he'll come. We've missed him.
Yeah, I passed him during the week. And he asked me when the meeting was, and I told him.
Oh, we'll start with public comments. Ken, do you have something to say to us?
I was just here to hear what the updates are and ask one real quick question. With all the fires that occurred up north from high voltage lines coming down, has there been any concern voiced about the high voltage lines going up and down the peninsula with the electrification? Has that become an issue at all, or nobody cares?
I've not heard any concern expressed. It certainly is something that one ought to pay attention to.
What's
They are pruning the trees to get clearance
what's
on both sides.
Are the requirements the same for the electrification? Is the for PG&Es work in the
No,
forest?
the electrification requirements are much stiffer.
They're stiffer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think because the lines are exposed. They're,
Well, they're supposed to be PG&E too.
well, they're
Yeah.
supposed to be shielded, right? But obviously the high speed,
There you
the
go,
overhead
Greg.
wires
Got
for
one left for
Caltrain
you.
have to be exposed so that they run along and conduct a current.
So
There's
let's
nothing
catch up. So
addressed.
we have
There's nothing addressed in the EIR.
We
Okay.
have everyone here.
so we have Greg Conlon
We do.
and John Maltman.
Yes.
Excellent. So we have everybody today.
Yeah, how about that?
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, the next item is the approval of minutes. You were all sent those. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes that anyone would like to make?
I had one comment on them. It looks like the minutes that were sent out were marked up draft.
Yes.
In item 5C, the fourth bullet point, looks like the intent was to make it say the town seeks to add on the Watkins Avenue crossing to the quiet zone with the addition of quad.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So I might as well leave in the rest of that sentence, quad gates at the Watkins Avenue crossing, period, would be fine.
Okay, well, I'll correct the gates on the minutes. We actually have a discussion item today on this. So I apologize, the agenda that we had last time was just listed as discussion without an action item for recommendation, so we have it on today's agenda with the opportunity for the committee to actually make a recommendation to the council. And so you'll notice that there's a change in format on the agenda. That's to help us to comply with the Brown Act and have clearer descriptions of the items that we will be discussing at our meeting. Any other comments on the minutes?
Other comments or corrections? Do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Aye.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? And the minutes are approved. We have no presentations. The first item on the agenda is the Peninsula Electrification update. We have a number of interesting items there. The Joint Powers Board, of course, is meeting on Thursday, so their most recent meeting was the November meeting. And at that time, they noted that construction on the overhead catenary system design drawings is 60%. And the signaling has not yet been undertaken, and the power system is only a little over 50% designed. The construction has been limited to foundations and poles. They had 36% of the foundations in and 16% of the poles, so they've got a long ways to go. If any of you were to walk out here as I did at Fair Oaks and also down at Watkins, you can see the center line foundations are in there, but there's nothing that I could see passing through the station area. Has anyone seen more of it than that?
Well, they've been, like I said, doing some work in terms of those foundations. They did close the Watkins Avenue crossing to do one of the foundations on the side of the intersection.
Mm-hmm.
They will be coming back to do some additional foundation work. I think I've shared some of those drawings with those members that were interested. And they'll be coming back at some point to do work right in the vicinity of the Fair Oaks crossing, and we'll have to close the road for that as well.
Pour another foundation, or?
Well, they have foundations on either side of the intersection, about 100 feet or so away. And so they, because of the method of construction that they use, the train of equipment ends up being in the intersection.
Oh, okay.
And so for that evening, we have to close the road. And so they set up detours. I don't know if you were, if you saw the detours that were set up for the Watkins crossing.
Oh, for Watkins, okay.
And so they'll do something similar with Fair Oaks, directing traffic that wants to cross around over to Watkins.
Do we know how they're going to put in a foundation at the station, considering where they would locate it is also a platform, technically?
Their work is during non-service hours typically.
Okay.
And so, I mean, they've been installing the foundations up and down the corridor, and most of it's night work, so.
I think there are some markings in the station. as to
Yeah,
where
no, they
they're
actually
going to go.
have cutouts for where those foundations go that have been covered with plywood.
So they're definitely coming back to have some.
Yes.
We'll probably get a notice if we're neighbors too.
So I did want to highlight a couple things. So Paul, I don't know if you
Yes,
have
please.
any. So Caltrain is planning on holding a community meeting regarding the electrification project. Outreach notification should be coming out soon. The tentative the date that they've scheduled is the 17th.
Can I comment on that? I think it's unusual to have something that close to Christmas if they expect the public to be there. Now, if they're intentionally doing that so the public will not be there, then it's the right date.
As opposed to Christmas itself.
As opposed to the 25th. It would be better on the 25th, but I think that's what they're doing.
I just got the card the other day.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. So
I mean, they should push it off till January. I mean, what is a rush?
I think they're holding several up and down the peninsula. So
They're holding one in Menlo Park tomorrow night.
And that's,
If you really want to go, you can go there.
Slightly better.
well, I just think it's amazing that they would schedule it there.
okay.
I was not amazed at all.
No, I just,
I found it totally in character.
All right.
Then related to this, PG&E will be doing their adjustments of the poles at Maple at Station and at for the Watkins crossing, raise over the poles, raise over the electric lines, and that work is anticipated, I think, Saturday the 14th
Of December?
of December.
Have they completed their pruning of trees and foliage? Have they done that work yet?
For the
Yeah.
electrification,
Yeah.
I believe that they did. That was done some time ago.
Okay.
I don't know, it says in my postcard, which I received the other day, that they're going to start the pruning. That I received the same letter a year ago, the same
Okay.
postcard a year ago.
Well,
No, literally, saying
yeah,
that they're
no,
gonna
I mean,
start.
we've seen them
So,
pruning
I don't
and
know.
stuff for some time, so.
So I don't know if it's
um,
just an old card or. I'm not sure.
But there's definitely an opportunity on the 17th to get a lot more information.
From PG&E,
No, from
No.
Caltrans.
was PG&E considered at all burying that wire and going underneath the tracks?
That discussion was held, I believe,
It was, huh?
Yes.
And what was the conclusion?
not,
Too expensive or what?
Um,
I mean, it's the obvious right answer, so they had to have a reason not to do it.
cost and timeline.
Yeah, timeline, I think, mostly.
They had a timeline that they had to meet for basically the entire corridor in terms of adjusting their facilities, because Caltrain has the rights that were granted to the Southern Pacific, and they're doing what they're required to do to meet their obligations to the train.
But the town could bury the wires ourselves if we wanted to.
They said that?
Well, there's a
Yeah, and we
Fund
had
20K that funds could be used,
Yeah.
but
and we
there's
had
a longer discussion on it.
we had a long discussion and went to council to talk about underground utility districts back when that was a discussion item.
I don't understand. There is money available or not to do it?
Not sufficient.
not sufficient to do that much.
Well, that money was there for the neighborhood to match PG&E's funding. They were only funding 20% of the.
Well, what I would suggest is if we want to have a more in-depth conversation on the underground utility district, that we can do that outside the scope of this meeting. I mean, we went to council with it. We have agenda material that we can share.
You've already done that, had that discussion.
Yeah.
And I think
Too expensive?
the key point is time delay. They would not meet the criteria for their time delay, and then we'd have to set up a special district to do the
Underground.
undergrounding component.
I can't believe you've ever done anything on time, so what, I don't know what the big fuss is now.
It depends on whose time and what you're discussing. Caltrain is proceeding with their positive train control system. They have been working on the revenue service demonstration on a short piece of track down to the south end of the line, where they've installed the PTC control and hardware. They've done brake tests on a number of locomotives. They're making some progress there. They expect to spend all of 2019 completing the system-wide installation of positive train control. So far as meeting the December 31st deadline for completing that, it won't happen. They will not even be certified fully through their revenue service demonstration projects. But the FRA apparently is behaving very leniently toward both them and other railroads, and they will make accommodations. So if they keep plugging away, eventually one hopes that it may happen. But they expect it to take at least another year before they're complete. They're also they're discussing alternative schedules. There's an interesting upturn on the constant warning time system. There's been a bit of an explosion over in Denver about the Denver lines where the constant warning time is designed by Balfour Beatty, Caltrain's contractor, who is designing Caltrain's system. And Narissa, you have some comments you'd like to make on that?
Thank you, Paul. So I have a breaking news update on Denver and its potential negative repercussions for Caltrain's electrification. This is complex. If you don't understand something, just ask me at the end or stop me. We've gone through it for 2 years now. And it's hard when you just hear bits and pieces. But I've stayed on track of this is a total reversal now. So,
For the benefit of the public, maybe you should get closer to the mic.
oh, I think I'm okay.
Well, project your voice, I suggest you project.
All right. So, in a reversal, the FRA has now threatened to go so far as potentially suspending operation of Denver's Regional Transportation District's electrified commuter line because of non-compliance with the terms of the waiver, which the FRA granted in September of 2017, and to which the Public Utilities Commission of Colorado agreed 7 months later, this past April of 2018. Denver Transit Partners designed, built, and operates the 3 electrified rail lines for Denver's Regional Transportation District. And Caltrain's design-build contractor, Balfour Beatty, is a major player in Denver Transit Partners. Caltrain's positive train control supplier, Wabtec, also played a critical role in Denver's failing, non-compliant positive train control and grade crossing warning safety systems. So there are 2 threads, Balfour Beatty and Wabtec. There are other companies involved in Denver Transit Partners. In the just made public November 15th letter, the FRA further refuses to allow the 3rd electrified commuter line, the G line, to begin operation despite its having sat idle for 2 years past the original start date of October 2016. The FRA is quoted as having characterized the Denver Transit Partners system as not a, quote, vital positive train control system, and the grade crossing warning times as being routinely non-compliant, even with the relaxed standards provided by the FRA's waiver. When Denver Transit Partners positive train control is activated, then crossing warning times are significantly more outside the bounds of the generous FRA waiver provisions than when the positive train control system is not activated. The FRA had granted precisely what Denver Transit Partners had requested of the FRA in May of 2017, an additional 20-second buffer beyond Denver Transit Partners programmed warning times for safety device activation at grade crossings. Systems which had been designed by Denver Transit Partners and then approved by the PUC in 2013 and 2014. The FRA had approved in September of 17 that the crossing warning system could activate up to 5 seconds less or 15 seconds longer than the programmed warning times, which already included a plus or minus 5-second buffer time for activating safety devices at the grade crossings. Yet, the grade crossing safety warning devices are still not operating within these federally mandated boundaries of the waiver. To quote the FRA, this letter also serves to notify the Regional Transportation District and its partners, including Denver Transit Partner, that unless immediate action is taken to bring the Regional Transportation District's operations into compliance with the existing waiver and other applicable federal safety requirements, FRA will take other actions it deems necessary to bring about compliance. These actions may include, but are not limited to, enhanced enforcement of all applicable safety regulations against RTD and its partners, and or modification or revocation of the existing waiver, period. The FRA has also taken the highly unusual step of issuing a, to quote the FRA, personal liability warning letter to the individual responsible for directing the design, construction, and testing of the Eagle project. Despite these efforts, approximately 2.5 years have passed since FRA's initial grant of relief in this docket, and RTD has not made substantial progress in correcting critical safety issues that exist involving the Eagle project, unquote. In August 2018, 1 year after the FRA granted the waiver, testing showed that safety gates still failed to activate in sufficient time to provide the FRA's absolute minimum of a 20-second advance warning time, risking collisions with vehicular traffic at crossings. Human flaggers were then put back at 3 of the operational A-line crossings, at the crossing on the B-line, and once again required for all crossings during any testing on the stalled G-line. So the human flaggers which had been removed, now are back to some extent. Typically, the problems identified had been with very extended gate downtimes, not the insufficient minimums, which left vehicles unprotected as trains approached grade crossings in recent monitoring. Denver Transit Partners has failed to meet the threshold for safe operation of crossing warning times per the FRA regulation, section 234.225, and has failed to meet the requirements of constant warning time, the FRA warning letter states specifically. Denver Transit Partners CEO, in a defiant statement, John Thompson, pointedly defended his company's work on the 3 commuter lines Thursday, saying, quote, "The warning system is working exactly as specified, designed, and implemented." One final note, Balfour Beatty is also being sued separately from the lawsuits which are now going on between Denver Transit Partners and the Regional Transportation District of Denver over the 3 rail lines in the aforementioned Eagle project. Balfour Beatty is in fact being sued over a 4th electrified commuter line, which is approximately 1.5 years behind schedule, was supposed to have gone operational this year. It is called the Denver N line. Balfour Beatty and a different Canadian construction firm constitute, this time, the Regional Rail Partners, the design-build firm for the N line. Why this is important is that what we have focused on here is with these very increased gate downtimes, which now are allowed to be approximately 20 seconds beyond the program warning time. So a program warning time is typically 30 seconds of gate downtime. You're up to a 50-second allowed, approximately, gate downtime. And in some cases, the gates are not coming down sufficiently to protect vehicles as the train approaches. There isn't that 20-second minimum. But what will this mean for electrification? It may very well mean, and it raises an important issue, of whether Caltrain can meet its requirement to the federal government to increase rider capacity by the minimum of 10%. Because if you have increased gate downtime, you can't pack as many trains on the line. And that was the rationale through reduced headways. In addition, you have a very important issue that for some reason, 2.5 years after the A-line went operational with waivers and human flaggers for 24 hours a day, this problem still cannot be fixed. I do not know why. There is really no discussion of what the fundamental issue is. But it is a serious one since it affects every highway rail grade crossing on the line. Now, the Denver system is smaller. The A line is 23 miles. We're dealing here with 51 miles, etc. But the G line, as I said, has sat idle. The stations have been built, the tracks have been laid for 2 years. The FRA refuses to give the go-ahead. This is a serious issue, and I really hope that someone is looking into it, because Although Balfour Beatty is not the only entity involved in Denver Transit Partners, it is a very major player, as is Wabtec, who is specified in a lawsuit as the subcontractor for the grade crossing warning safety systems. That's the end of it.
Are there any comments about,
Has this person that's been indicted specifically, is he or she an employee of Balfour Beatty?
They've only been sent an individual warning letter, and that individual is not mentioned. I have not been able to find out who it is. It may not be Balfour Beatty, it might be the Regional Transportation District of Denver, it could be Fluor Corporation, which technically is the managing partner of the Denver Transit Partners. It could, it could be any one of a number of people, but it is just an individual liability warning letter. It's a very unusual step, but there's no information as to who this is. This whole project has been kept so close to the vest. There are no longer any videos being posted. I used to be able to watch the Regional Transportation District of Denver's board meetings. That's how I found out a lot of my information. There's no videos anymore. The only way I've been able to flush out additional information is the lawsuits have been filed, and I've read the claims and counterclaims. And these are allegations, of course, but that's really the only way you can find out any information. The Regional Transportation District for 2.5 years has gone in front of the FRA and the public in Denver, and they have said everything is fine, everything is working. They have been the spokesperson. Denver Transit Partners has not said anything publicly. They have made no public comment. And unfortunately now, the Regional Transportation District of Denver is faced, I believe, with a lot of public statements that they made, that the system was working perfectly, et cetera, et cetera. There are many other liabilities here which are too complex to get into. We just don't have the time. But suffice it to say, in the lawsuit, the counterclaim made by the Regional Transportation District of Denver, they are alleging that Denver Transit Partners, which again includes Fluor and other companies, not just Balfour Beatty, Balfour Beatty's the thread here along with Wabtec, that the rail bridges in the project were not built to ARIMA standards. ARIMA is the standard for railway engineering in the United States, typically. They were built to highway official standards. And that the RTD forced the retrofitting of those rail bridges, in one case, the destruction of the rail bridge and the rebuilding of it. And the Regional Transportation District of Denver is saying that when the operation of the commuter electrified line reverts back to the RTD, there's a 34-year contract where this concessionaire is going to receive monthly money and operate it. When it reverts back to RTD, what RTD is saying is we're going to have to provide much more maintenance on those rail bridges because you didn't build them as strongly as you should have, or they may have a much more shortened life. They're not worth they didn't have the value that we had specified. And none of this came out until very, very late. The bridges had to be rebuilt. It took a lot of time, et cetera, et cetera. The FRA said that since 2016, when the system went operational, as you remember, in April of 2016, there have been over 1,000 actions initiated by the FRA to correct problems with the lines ongoing. It doesn't go into great detail. And for the FRA now, this was a very brave letter, I believe. I really applaud the FRA. This took a lot of courage to come out after a waiver had been granted in 2017 to provide this extra -5 plus 15-second buffer and say, wait a minute, things aren't operating the way they should. There is a tremendous amount of political pressure to make this first public-private partnership for the first electrified commuter line work no matter what. And as you remember, the PUC resisted for an additional 7 months after the FRA granted the waiver. They wouldn't grant the change. They wouldn't allow for this additional 20-second buffer. It took 7 months. And what they said is, you, FRA, now you're responsible for making the system work. So I think it's a very brave letter on the part of the FRA, and I think it speaks to the serious safety issues at play here. I think they are afraid of a collision.
Well, thank you very much, Narissa. That's been very helpful.
Thank you.
I hope, I think we all hope that Caltrain is paying very close attention to what's going on in Denver, because they may very well be faced with a comparable problem.
If the wait times are too long, if the gates are too long, it's gonna cause big traffic backups. at
That's
some of
right.
these intersections.
That's something that Narissa
So-
didn't mention, but it's a major factor.
And we don't have 4-quadrant gates at every grade crossing the way they do in Denver.
Yeah.
Was there something we should do to bring this to the attention of Caltrains?
I have commented in Caltrain meetings in the past that they ought to keep a close watch on what's going on in Denver. I have not had a presentation as long as Marissa's, because she has a lot more facts than I
Well,
have.
could we file a letter with the board meeting to put them on notice of what's going on?
You,
Is that a letter that you were reading from?
we
It's just my notes that I have.
we could send a letter to the board, and it would appear.
If you want to do it, we'd have to do that under a future agenda.
Yes, we can't do it tonight.
Yeah.
But we could send a letter to the JPB that relays that information. Our friend Roland LeBrun throws rocks at them by mail every month. And we could do that if we choose to. And if you make a note of it, Robert, we'll agenda that
Okay.
item next time.
Do you recommend we do that?
I want to go on the record here and say that I am not, my intention is not to throw rocks or to do anything other than to say, this is very, very serious, and I truly hope the JPB members are aware of this. I do not know if they are. It's a difficult issue to follow. It's under the radar unless you're in Denver.
Well, it's difficult in many respects because the Alphabeti personnel there are different from the personnel here, and there are other things that one could cite in justification of what Caltrain is doing, but this is something that they should be very much aware of.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Does all this, does this have a file number, a master file number for this project? Can you tell from what you've done?
There is a docket number.
A docket,
in
that's
the
for a lawsuit
FRA.
though, isn't it?
It's a
Okay.
docket for the FRA, but it contains scant little information. There is very, very little information in the public domain. There is nothing that is all in one place. I have spent a tremendous amount of time finding this information. It took me a day and a half to get a hold of the letter.
Wonder if Colorado has some open records kind
Yes.
of law where you have to actually go request it,
Yes.
and then they have to,
That is correct.
Yeah.
They do.
as a public-private partnership, they have to, okay.
Yeah. Denver Transit Partners does not have to release any information at all.
Oh, they don't have to follow as a.
Just the RTD.
Just
The
the
RTP
RTP,
is the public agency. All right, I
I
think,
wonder if Narissa shouldn't go to the Thursday meeting and in essence make this same presentation. Now, they probably limit you to 5 minutes.
it limits you to 2.
Oh, 2?
2 minutes?
We can donate time to her,
But you
can't we?
can get people to donate time. The press would probably be there,
The press has never been there in any time that I've been there.
no?
Well, I'm thinking, I'm somewhat familiar with what Marissa has done. For example, many months ago, we took the position with Caltrain that they had no business starting this peninsula electrification program until they worked out the signaling problem that Denver has. Because if it's an insolvable problem, which is suggested in some of the papers that I read, the ability to make these gates go up and go down at the appropriate time through a signal that runs through the rails, but it was too weak and it was not working, it was unsatisfactory. Well, does it make sense for peninsula electrification, or for Caltrain to be proceeding the way that they're proceeding without working out this fundamental thing first? Anyway, for someday, for an attack on Caltrain and why they shouldn't be proceeding in a certain way, it would be wonderful if we had a record of having dropped on Caltrain a stack of papers like this pertaining to this project. That way they couldn't say, oh, we never knew anything about it. Now, you have custody of all the papers, I suppose, that you've spent countless hours, hundreds of hours developing. I just suggest that you might ask Marissa to put together a stack of just drop it on Caltrain. So you ought to be paying attention to this.
Our interest, of course, is to have Caltrain make it work and have it work properly the first time. But we certainly ought, we would certainly be within our responsibilities to alert them to this problem and hope that they would read it and understand it.
I would send a copy to the CPUC. They're responsible for the safety, the state of California.
Well, we can talk about it at the next meeting.
Yeah, we can deal with this at the next meeting. I think we've said about all we should say about the electrification project at the moment. I'd like to move on to the.
I wonder if there's another system anywhere else in the United States that would be impacted by this, that would have the same problems, whether or not they have Balfour Beatty as a contractor or not, but it seems to me it might go beyond Balfour Beatty. Is Caltrain the only other system in the country
That I know of.
that
Well,
might
all
be impacted by
all
this?
the railroads in the country are required to install positive train control.
But not on an electrified.
But they're not electrified. They're basically diesel railroads.
So
Well, there must be.
So the
What about, Amtrak?
conventional track warning system for constant warning time works, and for gate activation.
Yeah, well, it's worked for 100 years. or more.
What this system does, in essence, it's a wireless crossing activation system, and it uses global positioning satellite to locate the distance and speed of the train as it's approaching the crossing, and to then predict when the train will reach that crossing, and therefore when the gate should be activated. And it, so far, is not working.
It doesn't, yes.
It cannot, the buffer, let me say this, it's not a -5 + 15-second buffer. It's up to less than 5 seconds or more than 5 seconds, because they cannot come up with a constant time. It does not meet the constant warning time requirements. They cannot accurately predict when the train is going to arrive.
So they're doing the same thing we are, they're electrifying and putting in the positive train control at the same time?
They already did it 2.5 years ago. They went
They what?
operational.
This is
They went
Denver.
operational 2016.
This is Denver went operational. Caltrain is putting in positive train control because it's a federal mandate. It's
Before electrification?
Yes.
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
and they're also electrified, and so they're. We don't know what the control system. We don't know the basic fundamentals that would say that this is impossible.
Right.
Presumably, there is some calculation somewhere that will demonstrate that this can work, or they would never have started it. But there are problems that we have insufficient detail to really make any comment about.
Has Denver electrified?
Yes, they built a brand new system from
It's
scratch.
a new electrified line.
Okay.
They built it from scratch. They're not retrofitting something.
Yeah, now let's move on to the next agenda item. Mike, after that discussion, would you give us an update on the litigation, the results of the October 26th hearing?
Yes, we had the hearing on October 26th, and as you know, the court ruled against our position that 1889, the statute, was
The formal
unconstitutional.
ruling is out on
It's,
that?
yes,
I did
it's,
not know
it's
that.
formalized. And so let me just tell you what the central legal issue by giving you an example. As you know, Proposition 1A was replete with very rigid requirements and restrictions on what had to be done before any Proposition 1A money was spent. One of the most important provisions said this: first of all, the High-Speed Rail Authority has to select the usable segment that it wants to build. A usable segment is made up, or has to have at least 2 stations. It has to be electric, and most importantly, they can't start building the usable segment until they have all the money in the bank to complete the usable segment along the lines of the cost that it will take. So that provision that I just recited to you, or paraphrased to you, that was put in during the last week before the initiative was submitted to the people. Why? To get the voters to approve it, because they were running around telling the voters, you know, this is not the usual public works project where we start something, then they just spend like crazy and they run out of money and they have an uncompleted asset and it's a mess. No. In this one, they can't start spending until they have all the money in the bank to complete what they plan to build. So this is central to the idea of Proposition 1A. Well, that requirement has frustrated the High-Speed Rail Authority for 10 years, because every time they plan to build a usable segment someplace, by the time a couple of years pass, it's doubled in price. And so they don't have the money in the bank, so they can't start it, because they don't have the money in the bank to finish it. So it's a real problem. And so the legislature, desperate to spend the $7.5 billion left in Proposition 1A, wants to find a way to spend before they have the money in the bank to complete the project. So they came up with that statute, 1889, thinking they could modify or change Proposition 1A to allow the money to be spent before they had the money in the bank sufficient to complete the usable segment. The court said the statute was constitutional, so it rejected our claim. So what we're doing right now is we're talking to the Atherton people, like Bill Connors and George. We're talking to Kings County, and Stuart Flashman and I are trying to get the permission. We have the permission of the rest of our clients, but we're trying to get the permission of these 2 important clients, Atherton and Kings County, to proceed with an immediate appeal of this decision. Because when you take an appeal, the Court of Appeal is required to receive your briefs, hear the argument, and decide the case on the merits. They can't just dismiss your appeal and refuse to hear it. This would be a full-fledged appeal where you get a ruling on the merits. And this goes far beyond the high-speed rail project. You can readily see that this impacts the entire initiative process in California. Anytime the voters pass an initiative which has rigid restrictions on how the money is to be spent, or what has to be done or complied with before any money can be spent. And if the legislature, by passing an ordinary statute, is able to get around that and undermine it, then it makes a mockery of the initiative process. And there are existing Supreme Court decisions that say the legislature cannot modify by a statute an initiative passed by the voters with restrictions like this. So we think we can attract public interest law groups and other groups who are very interested in preserving the sanctity of the California initiative process to join in our appeal and file amicus briefs because this is a matter of great public interest to the citizens of California. So that's what we're doing right now. We're talking to Atherton, Kings County, in hopes of getting an appeal going, and that would be, we would probably be able to get that going within the next 30 to 45 days. It would be very low cost because all the legal work has been done. It was all done at the trial court. Just a matter of our putting this issue before the Court of Appeal, filing legal briefs based on research already done, and then having the oral argument and having it decided by the Court of Appeal. So that's the status.
Did the judge in this case address that issue at all? Or
Yes, he said,
ignore
well,
it?
you know, the legislature said we should have the right to spend so long as what we hope to build is going to be suitable for high-speed rail someday. And he felt that loosey-goosey language was okay. So it's sort of a travesty.
Yeah. I mean, under what principles he was thinking, like, how much can you change, or he just said this one's okay, and he didn't say like basically like at what bound can the legislature go to change an initiative before it becomes unconstitutional?
Well, he said that so long as it was going to be suitable and ready for high-speed rail someday, that
This
was
is kind of like a one-off.
So what it allows is it allows current spending on something that they don't have the money to finish, and that it undermines that whole purpose of one. He just refused to accept our arguments.
And I thought you said there was a Supreme Court ruling that said the legislature couldn't do that.
There is a Supreme Court ruling, and he refused to follow that. Sometimes judges do this.
Are we talking the state Supreme Court?
The state Supreme Court.
So you go to the appeals court and then the Supreme Court,
Yes.
get it reversed.
That would be the hope.
The appeals court could reverse it.
Well, I know, but the Supreme Court was the one that made the original decision. If you get up to that level again, they'll probably.
Well, no, the Supreme Court has never ruled in our high-speed rail case on this particular issue.
Oh, they haven't. I
No,
thought you said they did.
no, they-
They
Yeah.
just ruled on the
This is-
initiative process.
But this really is very important for the whole initiative process, no matter what issue you're talking about. That's why we think that the courts will take an interest in it.
So would the steps be the appeals court first and then the state Supreme Court?
That's correct. You take it to the appeals court, and if you get a ruling and you win, then the other side, the High-Speed Rail Authority, would take it to the Supreme Court. If we lose, then we would take it to the Supreme Court. You make the same arguments to the Supreme Court, your chances of getting the Supreme Court to hear it would be enhanced because of what I've been talking about. This is of vital public interest because it affects the initiative process.
Could it eventually?
Can't let the legislature go around changing or modifying an initiative. That is what the Constitution requires. An initiative cannot be changed or modified by the legislature. The people's initiative is supreme over any statute. That's what we're arguing. And that's what the state Supreme Court held in 1922 and subsequently in other types of cases.
If we win at the
If you
Supreme
don't
Court.
win in the state Supreme Court, can it go to the U.S. Supreme Court?
Then you're dead.
It can't
This is
go
a matter
beyond
of
that.
state law, matter of state law. So if you lose in the state Supreme Court, you can't take it to the U.S. Supreme Court. Doesn't involve a federal question.
And if you win at the state Supreme Court, it goes to a retrial at the
If you win at the state, if you were to win at the state Supreme Court, I think what it means in our case is we could immediately stop them from spending any Proposition 1A money.
Okay, so they basically would rule in your favor, not have the judge in the trial court.
there would be no necessity for a further trial,
Okay.
so it would have immediate effect.
Okay, well, thank you very
You're
much,
welcome.
Mike. You've been most helpful and most illuminating.
Is Atherton gonna support this, do you know?
But that is up to the council and the city attorney. We have
When will
no,
they have the discussion?
we have no say in that at all.
Can we make a recommendation?
No.
Not really, no.
You can talk to your elected separately, but this is not an action item.
He's right here. He's keeping kind of quiet, so.
How much money we talking?
Okay, the next item on the agenda is the Dunbarton Rail Corridor. Do you have any more information than I have, Scott?
No, I'm just gonna discuss it for public consumption. After years of being the liaison for Dunbarton Rail and going to a grand total of one meeting, which was effectively to dissolve I think it was called the Citizen Advisory Committee. And I'm doing a little bit of rehash of what most people already know. A year ago, they paid for a study, and the study made some recommendations on how the changes that need to be made to the Dunbarton corridor, including rail. Facebook has taken interest in this, and as of August, they created a working group with a company called the Plenary Group. And so what's being distributed to you is a rough timeline on their plans for researching the viability and work involved in making changes to the corridor, which I believe includes the possibility of re-enabling rail service, which historically was just, my understanding was just freight, but the interest for the Bay Area is to turn that into a rail commuter line. So there isn't too much, as you can tell from the timeline, there isn't too much to do so far, but sometime in Q1 there's supposed to be a notification for community outreach, and we'll see what kind of feedback we get.
And this is the study paid for by Facebook? Is
Yes. So this is a consequence of that. So Facebook was still interested in trying to revitalize that corridor, and so this is the next step for the possibility of enabling a rail line.
And Scott, who is going to do the study?
It's going to be this working group. It's called Cross Bay Transit Partners. That's not. I have another pamphlet that, for anyone interested in more detail, you're welcome to grab it. It's basically a combination of the Plenary Group and Facebook in conjunction with Samtrans. So sometime this upcoming quarter, they should be reaching out to the communities that will be affected by the CEQA and other work that might happen on the corridor.
Does that also apply to Atherton?
And actually, I was just going to lead into that. I was going to ask the group, what is Atherton's interest in the Dunbarton rail line? Like, it doesn't broach our boundary in any way.
Well, it goes into Redwood City, and they would
That's
have
true.
to turn around the trains, and they would use what do you call it, a third rail, not a third rail, but to turn the train around.
A Y,
A what?
a Y.
I believe that already
W.
exists, by the way.
The other
I
way.
think that if you look at Google Maps closely at that intersection, there actually are tracks that actually
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
around. So I believe that the infrastructure and the right-of-way already exists to do so.
To turn the trains around?
But there was a track,
Without
a
affecting
third track
Atherton?
that was supposed to go as far as Farrell's Lane.
It kind of.
Oh, really? Okay, that would be news to me.
This-
So in that respect,
go
maybe
either
there
side,
is some
go north.
interest.
Yeah, I think it's good for us just to keep tabs on what's going on.
Okay.
I mean, it
Well,
comes pretty close to.
It's changing, but it's changing people traffic in the area, which has an impact on other transportation facilities.
Yeah.
So we have an interest in that, if nothing more.
Okay.
Yeah,
There was a proposal years ago as part of the discussion of what to do with Dunbarton Corridor for a flyover track for southbound trains. It would fly over the, be
Mhm.
elevated, go over the north-south lines and turn south, and then it would have to merge into the main line, and the merger rail would impact the other.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, that I didn't know.
If
Okay.
that was done, that could be a problem.
My recollection is that, there was money provided, I don't know whether it was Measure A or what, $40 million, that the MTC stole from
It was 92 million.
92 million.
92 million. But
Yes.
don't forget that, because at some
Yes.
point,
Yes.
you ought to resurrect that, especially with this money that's being passed
Yeah.
for transportation funds. You ought to get that 92 million back and use it for Dunbar, because that's what the original purpose was.
You talking
Yeah.
about Measure W or?
Is Facebook
Yeah.
willing
Well,
to
you
put
got,
up
you got
much
the state
funding?
level, you got the.
That's actually
Yes,
part of the
tax.
timeline. Identifying
maybe-
funding is part of next
Yes.
year's strategy. So the short answer is no, they have not identified money yet. Sort of a historical note, Regional Measure 2, which is what supplied that 92 million that I agree with you was stolen. That came from Regional Measure 2. Regional Measure 2 actually listed what they called the Sun Microsystems Station at the time as one of the, not primary, one of the priority projects for Regional Measure 2. Obviously that never happened, but it'll be interesting to see if Facebook tries to make the case that there needs to be more public funding, because historically there was supposed to be funding for a Sun Microsystems, now Facebook station.
Well, Facebook is so much larger than Sun ever was.
Yeah, I don't know about total employee count, but yeah, certainly presence, it's pretty large. So there's the historical funding, 92 million. There's, from Regional Measure 3, there's supposed to be about 230 million, which is peanuts. It's like barely 10% of what they would need in order to resurrect a rail line. The early projections were around 2.3 million to create a rail line between Newark and
Billion.
Billion. Did I say million? Sorry, I meant billion.
Cheap it'd be.
Yeah. Let me
Is it
open up my
difference?
pocketbook. Yeah.
Because the existing structure out there is not suitable for anything.
Yeah, it doesn't meet any seismic current
No,
seismic standards.
You wouldn't want to put a bus on that level of
No.
a train.
Is the object of all this to get Facebook employees who live in the East Bay to work and then home to the East Bay?
It's a part of a larger strategy to reduce congestion. Anyone who's had to drive around here, around rush hour, around the three main arteries, that feed into the Dumbarton Bridge, which is Marsh Road,
Yes.
University Avenue, and Willow, it's an utter madhouse. The construction made it worse, the reorientation of Willow, but even when that's fixed, it's still going to be bad because there's just too many cars going towards one bridge, and
Yeah.
they need to alleviate.
Has anybody ever seen any stats about how many of the 30,000 employees of Facebook live in Menlo Park?
That's a good question. I don't.
Anybody ever seen that?
Not very many, I would assume.
Because they can't afford it,
No, they cannot.
because it's too expensive. If Facebook was just built, so
Some of them. can-
Some
of them, yeah, that's true.
Well, a few of them, yeah.
Palo Alto.
Yeah.
They get bused to San Francisco.
yes, they do. Well, has Facebook got facilities in San Francisco?
They
No,
all,
that's where they live.
That's where they live.
Yeah.
A lot of
Oh,
Major
I see what you mean.
those
Yes.
millennials.
Yes,
They like the city of life.
that's right. That's a good point.
It's part of the package.
So anyways, I'll have more
Yeah.
updates in
Okay.
Q1, once we get like outreach and meetings. There's no meeting scheduled on this yet, it's still in that early phase.
Yeah, I
Well,
think,
there was a meeting 5 years ago or so, of that group that you're part of, that has minutes that went through how they stole the 92 million. So if you ever wanna get it on the record, there should be minutes of that meeting
Oh,
that
that's interesting.
display that.
Okay.
I'm not sure that would do any good to throw it at MTC at this
Yeah,
point.
yeah, I think, yeah.
Hey, you throw anything you got, see if it sticks.
Yeah, you might.
I did, this is something that most of you would be interested in, but naturally, the big companies in Silicon Valley, they're all for high-speed rail, and Their chief justification is that they need the workers in the cheap housing areas of Modesto and Fresno and so forth to be able to come to the expensive Silicon Valley to work. And the high-speed rail is going to be ideal for that, even though the commute cost per worker would be $32,000 per worker per year. And who's going to pay for that? The workers certainly couldn't. If they're going to get a $32,000 raise for that, I don't know.
I mean, the only point I would make is that, relatively speaking, you don't have to go to Modesto or Fresno to get cheap housing. Relatively speaking, you only need to go to, say,
Gilroy.
Livermore, Gilroy.
Right.
Los Banos.
Los
Yeah.
Banos, yes,
Yeah,
it's
it-
Los
Yeah.
Banos.
I agree that that's likely a motivating factor for why there's support for high-speed rail,
Mhm.
but I would counter that we need a much better regional transportation plan than a statewide transportation plan.
And a definition of what cheap is.
Are they gonna possibly break the study into two, where they said what is the cost of Menlo Park to Redwood City, and then what is the cost of Newark to Menlo Park?
Yeah, they haven't.
They haven't said that.
Yeah, they haven't done anything. There are
Because that's
initial studies.
Yeah, the Cross Bay is gonna be the very, very, very expensive part, and I could see that, you know, more closely you could cobble together something between Redwood City and Menlo Park, because most everything is already there.
Oh, this, yeah.
Yeah, the hard part is rehabilitating the bridge
Yeah,
and
that's
all
the
that.
expensive part.
Yeah.
And also, this might, well, it's not clearly defined yet. From the original study, there were changes to the Dumbarton corridor that included not doing any rail service. So I think that's gonna be part of the scope.
Oh, you mean like run buses or something?
Right, like, or just add another generic bridge, change the number of lanes, change the lighting,
Bike and
the
pedestrian.
signaling.
I can,
Yeah, that's also, yeah, so it's not just about rail.
Scooter.
And just for the record, the town of Atherton is the only one that actually opposed and wrote a letter to that effect of the redistribution of the $94 million.
But
Transdev looked for partners to sue over it, but couldn't find any.
And there's a guarantee that that money will come back.
you got that right.
Well, they just got RM3 to pay.
Well, they do
There's always
something
harm
like that,
for-
but don't.
Because those were San Mateo County tax dollars. And
Say again?
Those were San Mateo County tax dollars and should have been spent in
Yeah,
San Mateo
should
County.
have been
Yeah.
San Mateo,
San Mateo County, correct.
was that, what money
And it
was
went,
that?
it went to Alameda.
Oh, but what money?
Park?
Park.
Yeah, Alameda Bart,
Was it Prop A, was it
Fremont.
the old Prop A?
Was it-
No,
No,
it was.
Regional Measure 2.
Regional Measure 2.
Yeah, it had requirements that if funding got redistributed in some way, it had to stay within the, basically help the same area. Like, they couldn't redistribute east-west money that was meant for east-west traffic to Richmond, for example, but they effectively did that. I think it was actually Warm Springs that.
Yeah, Warm Springs, correct.
Yeah, when you use the money there. Isn't there a lawsuit there someplace?
No, there's a handshake that's coming back.
Okay, let's move on. The next item on the agenda is the revision. We need a vote on the revision to the material on the town committee
Rail policy.
policy. And the wording there is on your minutes for the last meeting.
No, it's,
So what we need to do on this now is to.
Excuse me, I have a question, and I probably should have brought this up at an earlier meeting. As the rail policy issue bullet points that were at the end of this.
Yes.
There was one that said, ensure any long-term corridor rail plan limits 2 tracks through Atherton. And that has been stricken, and I was just wondering, what was the rationale for striking that?
I don't know. Do you, Robert?
Well, I think that the policy was split in terms of where focus was put. So there's the there's a high-speed rail section and a Caltrain section. And so, the changes that have been discussed thus far have been to the bullet points associated with Caltrain. Before it was an overall, and now it's been bifurcated. And so there's a section related to high-speed rail and the town's opposition to it.
Mhm.
And then there's the language related to Caltrain.
So it's a two-track item that you
High-speed
mentioned
rail.
in the high-speed rail part.
I think our general opposition, what we know is that Caltrain isn't really looking at making it, having any more tracks. And with the information that we got from high-speed rail, they're not looking at any additional tracks here in town either.
Well, with
And
the
so-
exception of the bypass tracks.
But the bypass tracks, as far as.
Which would not go through Atherton.
They're not going through Atherton, so we're not looking at,
Well,
the
they-
information we've gotten thus far is no additional tracks in town.
But, once you begin putting bypass tracks in, things can grow out of hand if one's not careful.
It would be
I don't see
difficult
what the
for-
harm would be to keeping that in there. This is just a,
Let's see here.
For what it's worth, it would be difficult for them to do it because they're putting in the center poles. Yeah.
Yeah, so I say, really, the right of way really isn't gonna be there for them to do it anyway.
They don't have the width.
you know,
They don't have the width in this section of the corridor to put more tracks in. They'd have to take land.
What, isn't there a modification needed in that last sentence?
Yeah,
there
so we
was.
have the comment from Jim to put the word gate,
From quad to crossing,
huh?
back, quad to crossing back in.
Quad gates at Watkins Avenue crossing and
Yeah.
that back in,
Correct.
because it's deleted on my draft.
Correct.
Yes, that's an error on my part, so
Okay.
I apologize.
Well, I thank you, gentlemen, for putting that in. I wasn't here, but I appreciate you doing that for my personal,
It was for your benefit.
huh?
It was, because we knew how much you talk about it.
Good.
Are there any further comments about this? Are we ready to take a vote on it? Pass this on to council?
May I
Teresa?
just ask you one quick question? Is this everything that we had discussed at that one
That's
stage?
my understanding. If you wanna modify this, you're welcome to discuss any sort of
No, I just wanted to
modification.
make sure, because we had it
Yeah.
nicely worked out, and I think, I just.
And this is, I think, based on the discussion that happened at the last meeting,
Right,
kind of the
right.
strikeouts and
Right.
things, so.
So just to be clear, the changes are we're putting the gates at the Watkins Avenue crossing back in and the no third track bullet point.
Where would that third track be?
No, it's just saying we don't.
Do you wanna add no additional tracks? I mean, but again, with that, let me
Is
pull
that
up.
wording in there? Are you gonna put it in?
Yeah, it's not in there right now.
It's not in
They're
there
gonna
now.
put it in.
Yeah, that's what.
Well, this is what you are, this is an item that you can recommend to council for their consideration.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, the whole thing is for their
Yeah.
consideration.
Yes, yeah.
We make no.
And
judgment.
so I just wanna see if I can, don't have. I'm just gonna pull up the policy, so please give me a minute. As it was modified by the council. So that was May 16th.
Can I make a comment while he's doing that?
Sure.
Yeah.
On a different subject. You know, there's a hearing tomorrow morning in the California Supreme Court that addresses the issue of pensions in the 1955 decision that said that the pensions benefits when the employee starts have to be kept. And this whole hearing tomorrow morning is about changing that, getting the Supreme Court to reverse that, because the district court and the appeals court ruled to be able to change that. So this will be quite an argument. It was only for an hour. It's online if you want to watch it at the Supreme Court, California Supreme Court, from 9 to 10 o'clock on their website. come up at 5 minutes to 9. But it'll be the same argument that you're struggling with the high-speed rail about the wording going back to the initiative being upheld. In this case, it's going back to an earlier Supreme Court decision in the early 50s or 60s. They're trying to change it.
Okay. So prior to it, there was a section for rail corridor and Caltrain with a whole bunch of stuff regarding rail service and the EIR for electrification, etc. And so let me see if I can find where that bullet was. So,
I think this is the way, the right way. I think what you have here is correct.
yeah, no, just to respond back to the comment about the third or fourth track. There is, in that same section regarding Caltrain, ensure any long-term corridor rail plan limits 2 tracks through Atherton. So it was there, and if you want to add that as a bullet item in your recommendation, you can certainly discuss that, and we can incorporate that.
Would you like to nominate that, Tommy?
Yes, I would.
Okay, let's put it in there.
And so I will read you the bullet point that was there before, and if you want to leave it the way that it is, I can just copy it. If you want to modify it, I can modify it. So the bullet reads, ensure any long-term corridor rail plan limits 2 tracks through Atherton.
I think that says it all.
Okay.
That would apply to Dumbarton Rail as well as high-speed rail.
It would be any rail improvements here in town.
Any comments on this? Are we ready to vote?
I move to vote.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, we recommend to the council that they,
So we have Alex, and then was it
Yeah,
Scott second? Okay.
Out of curiosity, you moved to vote in favor of?
We gotta move it.
Move to vote. Yeah, you can vote. Now you all vote.
Okay.
Oh, now we all vote.
Okay, so do you want to make
wanna
a
move
motion
it?
to approve the,
I
why don't you
I
just-
move to vote to approve the minutes as, the resolution as amended
to the council
to
for
the council
consideration?
for consideration.
Okay.
Okay.
And Scott,
second
second.
on that?
I'll second it.
Well, we already have
All right.
Scott,
All
so,
right, all in favor?
Aye.
okay, excellent.
Okay. That is done.
Thank you, Gary.
Hey, it was just move to vote. I hear you. Now let's, what are we voting on?
Okay, now we're through with the regular agenda. We have,
You have 5E.
Memorial plaque for Rosemary.
oh, I'm sorry, we skipped over that. Yes.
You're looking at the minutes
Oh, I'm
from
looking at
last
the
time.
minutes, I'm not looking at the agenda. Yes, we've got the memorial plaque. We have settled on the wording on the plaque. We voted on that some time ago. We may not have, I thought we had forwarded that to the council.
I think you did.
Yeah.
So just an update, I think that, and I believe that the council was in favor of putting in the plaque. It was just a matter of making sure that the Civic Center project is far enough along in understanding where that place, how that can fit into the context. And so with the Civic Center project moving forward, we're coming to council at the meeting later this month for approval of the design documents to go out to bid. And there was a desire to have further conversation about this item. So.
They want to have this conversation before they go out to bid, or?
No, I think there is a significant amount of time between now and when the station or the civic center is constructed.
Oh, yeah.
And
they're
so
looking for
what
us-
we don't want to do is put something in a place that's going to be damaged during that
I
work.
understand.
So,
So that means this should be on hold for how long? To what point in the construction of the town center?
I would say on hold, but not forgotten. I think that the goal is to figure out what the layout is, and then obviously to determine where potential plaque can be put in play.
I
on-
would suggest
on the
that
town's
we
property.
pursue talking to Caltrain about a temporary location in the station
No,
where
I
it would
think
be
that's-
meaningful
I think it's a
sooner
waste of time.
Yeah, if you just put it in the front of the station there
and have it removable.
temporarily.
Not installed permanently, but so that it could be
Right.
removed at the time that the civic center plans
Jack,
would accommodate it.
I honestly think you would just be wasting your time. They're not gonna do it, everybody would come up with, you know, I just don't think they would entertain it, I'll be honest with you.
Well,
You don't think they'll what?
I don't think they would entertain it, that was already turned down.
to
No
them,
way.
No,
would they
no,
do
we
that?
haven't asked them.
They
to
I,
do
wouldn't
that.
turn
Mike
that down.
Kashawati said it had been, way back when he was here,
I think that's correct.
that's correct.
So it would have to be an Atherton town line.
Yes.
That's why,
Yes,
that's
what
why
it
the
was turned down.
considerations within
Yep.
the civic center design and not on Caltrain property.
Right.
So is it, once we get the bids back and they're deemed acceptable, then we can talk about the
yeah,
placement of the plaque?
and I think we also need to understand how the contractor plans to do his work so that we put it in a place that it won't be.
And remember in the civic center design now, there's a lot of flexibility at this point because there's not a lot of landscaping. So there's going to be a lot of discussions on how we do landscaping as funding and time goes forward. So there may be areas of gardens, benches and stuff like that that at some point we would be discussing to, you know, a proper placement point.
we've got town bulletin boards still in the station, don't we? Are those town bulletin boards or are those Caltrain bulletin boards?
Caltrain.
It's Caltrain Bulletin
Yeah.
Board. The only thing I can think of that we could do, we could cast a bronze plaque and find a temporary location for it on the side of a building or something. But we'd have to pay careful attention to it so that we could move it before construction started and we don't get it ground up in that mess.
I think that's a good idea,
I'd like us to be able to see it,
yes.
Yeah,
and I'm sure John would as well.
So is that, do you want to vote on a recommendation to council Aston about purchasing a bronze plaque? Is that what
Yes.
you're suggesting?
we own the parking lot, don't we?
Portions of
Could
it.
be on a post in the parking lot.
Again, our site's gonna be under construction, so the concern would be where it's placed such that it doesn't get damaged and disturbed
Well,
during
what
that.
what
But
I'm
if we have
thinking,
if we have
Robert,
something mobile, then we can look at something that can be located and moved around.
If we put it on a temporary site, we would have it. When construction starts, we'd take it down and put it away for safekeeping until we could get a permanent site for it.
Okay.
But in the meantime, it would be available and we'd be able to look at it and read it and appreciate Rosemary every time we saw it.
I think we should have John's opinion on it.
Well, I contacted Paul before the previous meeting and just made the comment that it would be nice if it were up someplace while somebody still remembers
Still alive.
what she
Sure.
did
Remembers.
and even who she was. And so, yes, I'd like to see it, and I thank the committee. I didn't feel that I was the one to go and push the whole thing.
Okay. So is there a motion?
Do we have a motion for that?
I'll move.
Second?
I'll second.
Sure.
So Jack and Tony?
All in favor?
Uh,
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so I'll work with you, Paul, on putting that agenda item together.
Okay, fine,
Okay.
fine.
Thank you.
Okay, now we're to committee and staff members' comments. Jim?
I have nothing. Well, there were a couple of reports came out today, within the last few days. One was in something called the City Journal, which is published by the Manhattan Institute on high-speed rail, calling fast train to failure. If you just plug into City Journal, Manhattan Institute, you'll find that. And the other one was that Catherine Hamilton, the Hamilton report came out, and the title of her lengthy article is California High-Speed Rail Audit, Next Chapter or End of the Story. And it's at the hamiltonreport.com. If you want to take a look at that. So I have
What's the name of that one?
the hamiltonreport.com.
What's her email? I mean, the website.
That's it. It's www.thehamiltonreport.com.
The Hamilton Report,
Right.
any caps?
No spaces, no caps.
Is it the or just Hamilton?
Thehamiltonreport.com.
She generally sends those to me.
Where's that, I tried to find that Chronicle article, is that the first one you just mentioned?
Well, Jim, if you want to forward the information to me, then I can blast it out and attach things
Okay.
to the minutes as
Yeah,
well.
that would be nice.
Okay.
I'll do that.
That would be.
There was a Chronicle report, but I couldn't find it, I looked for it last night. It was in Sunday's Chronicle and I could not find it. So if somebody finds it, you might wanna put that in there too.
The Mercury News,
Is that where it was?
they had an editorial coming out against high-speed rail based on the audit that Elaine Howe did.
That would be good.
Yeah, I can send that too.
Okay.
Yeah, it was maybe a couple weeks ago. And actually, if you're done, Jim, I guess
I am.
I can go. Yeah, the state auditor, Elaine Howe, has faulted High-Speed Rail Authority for starting limited construction in 2013 before it completed critical tasks like buying land, relocating utilities, or obtaining agreements from outside groups, including local governments and other railroad operators. The costs doubled due to rush process and poor oversight within the authority over contracts. So the Mercury News had a report about this, and then they had a later on editorial saying, stop spending the money.
Stop.
Yeah, basically stop asking the California leaders to stop spending money on the bullet train because it's totally been a boondoggle in terms of the spending.
Has the governor mentioned anything since he was, the new
You
elect?
mean the governor-elect?
Governor-elect, has he mentioned anything, one way or the other?
I
I think he's waiting till he's officially in office.
He has.
He had historically voiced opposition, but he's been very quiet.
During his campaign, he went out as in favor of high-speed rail.
Right, I
in
think
Los
he
Angeles.
flipped at the end.
He did.
Yes, he did. Changed over and very supportive of the water aqueduct project at the same time.
But he came out for reducing capital gains taxes, which I'm very surprised. Because that's one of the big problems we have right now in our credit rating is the volatility of our tax revenues because of dependence on capital gain revenues. So that's a big step for him. Because of course he's gonna raise taxes elsewhere, but at least he's gonna try and eliminate the volatility from capital gains.
Well, these comments that the auditor made on the report were the reaction from High-Speed Rail in their official document was that they suggested a few changes that they were already thinking of, and it's all being worked out.
Until the next time. We're still working on it. CARD also has a good summary, and I'll send that up to Robert too. The other thing I wanted to mention is that Redwood City, they're moving toward grade separation. Well, I should say they're starting. So they approved to fund a study to look at grade separating Whipple. So the first one, the northernmost grade crossing. In 2009, they had actually done a study before, and the cost was estimated to be between $150 to $300 million. And if they wanted to do Whipple all the way to Maple, within Redwood City, it would cost up to $500 million, but they're all expecting the cost to likely double from that 2009 estimate. So anywhere from $300 million to $1 billion. So the study itself, which is just getting started, so that then they can apply for money later on, that's expected to cost $850K. $100K is coming from Redwood City, $750K from Measure A in San Mateo County, and then after they do the study, then they can start applying for funds. Whoever has enough money, but no one will. But who knows? San Mateo got theirs. Burlingame's looking for money now, and
Well, Measure A
Menlo
is
Park is looking for money.
Menlo Park has to move further along before. Well, actually, they actually are doing the study right now.
Yeah, Menlo Park's been talking about it for longer than these. They just aren't making much progress.
It'll be interesting to see with the 3 new council members, and especially with districts now that they have, whether they'll move forward with any of their proposals for grade separation in Menlo Park. But yeah, that's all.
Other comments?
Does that mean that we should be putting forth some proposals to do a study of our town to connect to Redwood City and Menlo? Since they are both doing it. I mean, it's all Measure A money. If you don't get in line, you're never gonna get any.
I don't think the official position of the town is to do grade separation.
Are we actually interested in doing
unless they do a tunnel.
Right, well, not a tunnel, but
Unless
what
they
do
do a
you
tunnel.
call it?
Trench.
Trench. I mean, we certainly
This
would be
one-
satisfied with a trench.
No, this won't
yeah.
be a trench.
It
This
can't
will be
be.
grade.
They're gonna raise.
They'll
Because of
raise
Atherton
and
Channel.
lower, and it'll be just like all the ones through San Carlos and Belmont.
The trench is not possible because of Atherton Channel, because it would run right through Atherton Channel. You have to build it below Atherton Channel, so it'd have to be a tunnel, or you'd have to raise it above the channel.
Well, it's the same problem at Palo Alto.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
that's
They have
right.
the same exact
They
problem.
have the same problem, which is why they're avoiding that.
So the 3 new council people in Menlo Park are what we call residentialists. They've replaced pro-development. Now, what side is in favor of grade separation?
You say which side?
No,
It depends. It depends because the residents.
are you a politician?
Well, it's true. It depends.
If you're next to it,
If
you
you're
don't
next to
want
it,
it.
your
If you
residents-
have to drive through it, you do.
Unless you're taking the property, then that's why it's really there's
Oh,
no.
you can flip quickly. huh?
So if someone else pays the money to build a tunnel, then residentialists and developments all come together, But if it's something like taking property, then obviously the residentialists don't like it.
Menlo Park is fine. I live in Menlo Park. They're finally rebelling against the horrible traffic situation. The
I
voters.
wanted to make a related comment here. When I first got involved in researching quiet zones 3 years ago, I talked extensively to San Diego, and it's fascinating. In San Diego, they took this area with all these railroad tracks downtown, and developers wanted to build huge apartment complexes there. And they did, and San Diego, the city and county of San Diego required that money be given by the developers to install quiet zones all along that area. And it worked hand in glove because it helped the developers, to create more attractive developments, and it also helped the city and county of San Diego to create a very large quiet zone. But yet you think of all of the apartments or condominiums or whatever they're going to be along El Camino
Yeah.
that back up to the tracks, it's massive. And nothing like that was done. It's
Yeah.
really a missed
It's
opportunity.
kind of too late now.
Well, now the quiet zones wouldn't solve the traffic problem though.
No, but they would have made life better
In the
for
apartments.
a lot of people.
When they're building right on
It's a
top.
missed
Fewer
opportunity.
train horns in the bedroom, yes.
Because most of that corridor is residential. So
Yeah, cause I talked to the engineer there and they did 11 intersections at $1 million each in San Diego. Cause I remember I used that number quite a bit when I was advocating putting in quad gates here and along the related
And
cities.
what they did in San Diego is because it's a fairly large area, they averaged it across the whole network. They didn't have to put 4 quadrant gates at every crossing. So it really worked out terrifically. I had one comment, Paul, if I may just
Yes.
wrap up. I wanted to remind you all the difficulty of creating a system of grade crossing warnings and positive train control. Let us not forget that CBOS, which was written off for $235 million, that was a system like the one in Denver, where positive train control was going to handle the grade crossing warning activation system. It's
That's
going to
right.
be one complex system but integrated.
One system was gonna do it all.
And now, and look where that went. And the system that Caltrain has had to purchase, I mean, in the interest of time, is this off-the-shelf system, as I have been able to read from Wabtec, but it does not provide an FRA-approved grade crossing warning system. So that all has to be built. And that, you know, that is going to take a very long time.
Has Freight actually finished their positive train control system? Is that on UP?
The freight railroads are up and down. They have some, they haven't completed, no.
It'd be interesting to see if it's both systems running, if they end up being compatible or incompatible. That's another.
Well, according to Caltrain, they're talking. Whether either side is listening is unknown at this point. Other comments?
I don't think this is necessarily doable, but I think with regard to electrification, we should have something like Mike Brady was talking about for high-speed rail, that you can't spend any more money on electrification until you've proven that you've got positive train control workable.
Well, that would be a very desirable thing. It's a little
But I
late
don't know
to
how
put
you
it
do
in,
it.
though.
I mean, the electrification isn't the result of a public initiative or anything.
No, it's not.
It requires good
But
decision-making.
I can see
They don't
we're gonna have poles and maybe wires for 10 years without electric trains running under them.
If Denver's experience is any indication, that could very well happen.
Okay.
The interoperability problem with the diesel freight trains is a major issue that has not been solved in Denver. It's not actually been solved here. They talk about it a lot, and they claim they're making progress, but they don't give us any of the technical details, so we can make no professional judgment about whether they're actually accomplishing anything or not.
Future agenda items, we have the one.
Yes, we have one future agenda item. Do we have more future agenda items?
I will give an update at our next meeting if there is any information, if you would
Okay.
like that.
Okay.
Let's put that down. I think it's in our interest to continue to monitor Denver very carefully. Because that portends the problems we may have here. We don't know that, but it's an indication.
And we've got the letter that we're gonna propose for the next meeting to bring the issues that you raised to the Caltrain.
Yeah, we have an item to talk about a letter to Caltrain regarding the issues that Denver Transit Partners has been experiencing.
Right.
And what about our resolution? Does that go to the, our town council and then if they pass it, do we send that to the Caltrains?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we would talk about recommending a letter. It would move forward to the council and.
Well, didn't we
get
approve a
Wait.
letter? In that resolution, and that, what is that resolution, where does that go?
You don't have a resolution.
We don't have a resolution.
We just changed the
We just-
wording of the.
So the resolution is a recommendation to council to have them change their resolution. And so we will, you voted on it, we will send a staff report to the council for
So
them
the
to
council will
consider.
make the resolution.
The
No, they'll
correct.
make
The-
the
the-
decision.
The letter that Narissa is referring to, you guys haven't heard about it yet. You haven't written it.
No, we haven't written it, so it can't go to the council until it's written.
But it should be for our next meeting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we should have it on our next meeting.
All right.
No, I've got one.
So we'll have to see what happens, you know, it just will depend on what happens in the next 2 weeks.
Whatever we do, we should send to the CPUC.
You can talk about it at the next meeting.
We cannot send it to the CPUC,
The council.
The council.
Recommend to the
As
council.
an individual, you can send.
You can send
Yes.
whatever you want as an
Because
individual.
especially as a former.
By the way, there was an article in the Palo Alto Daily Post, which Mike Brady circulated some time ago about this very issue of Denver Transit Partners, Balfour Beatty, Caltrain, if you remember.
Yes,
And the editor of the Palo Alto Daily contacted Caltrain for their comment, making them aware of this precise issue. And the comment was, nonsense, we aren't going to have any of those same problems here on the Peninsula Corridor. And what was the reason given? Because Denver has a separate freight track and from the electrified commuter track. So we're not gonna have any of the same problems.
We'll have all new problems.
Our situation is harder.
yeah, our,
They're on our.
That's
they're on
right,
the
all
same
new problems.
They built an electrified commuter line from
You got
scratch.
a little issue.
Yeah.
And the freight is
Actually, I
running
don't
with a
have it.
conventional track-based system.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure I agree.
I won't have exactly the same problems, it'll be worse.
That's very good.
Are there other comments? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
I move.
So
Second?
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Now we can be out of hand.